Just a few days ago, life seemed to unfold in a familiar rhythm, one marked by the busyness of work deadlines and the responsibilities that come with being part of a family. My wife Kelly and I navigated the usual peaks and valleys that accompany a committed relationship, experiencing our share of ups and downs. However, we managed to get through, and nothing felt insurmountable. Together, we had crafted a life filled with joy, love, and shared experiences that enriched our bond. Nonetheless, beneath the surface, a growing sense of unease gnawed at me. I tried to rationalize it, labeling it as mere stress from the demands of daily life, but the tension between Kelly and me began to intensify. Our small disagreements, which once seemed trivial, morphed into larger arguments. Kelly appeared more distant and unpredictable, and every time I attempted to initiate a discussion about what was happening, she would brush me off, creating an impenetrable wall between us. Deep down, I sensed that something was fundamentally wrong, yet I never anticipated the extent of the impending turmoil. Now, as I find myself sitting on the cold bedroom floor, utterly exhausted and overwhelmed, it takes an immense effort to reconcile where I am with where I was just a few days ago. The carpet, once a source of pride in our home, now stands as a stark reminder of everything that has unraveled. In that moment of despair, I close my eyes and silently proclaim, "What the hell am I doing? I'm better than this." Upon opening my eyes, I fixate on the hardwood bed, where a fleeting vision of Kelly standing there dances in my mind, but I quickly come to terms with the reality that this vision may never be a possibility again. Everything around me feels like it is spiraling out of control. My hands tremble as I strive to regain my composure, feeling utterly overwhelmed by the emotional weight of the situation. The world blurs before my eyes, yet amidst that haze, I catch sight of a half-empty bottle of alcohol and an empty pill bottle resting on the bed. A bitter thought crosses my mind: I forgot to cap the bottle, and the acrid smell of the alcohol permeates the room. Panic filters through me as I search for the letters I had written. Thankfully, they remain on the bedside table, protected from potential ruin. Yet a new wave of anxiety washes over me. What if the wrong person discovers them? That thought is fleeting, quickly dismissed. After all, I won't be around to worry about it. As I grapple with the chaos of my emotions, I question why things had to lead to this point. The bile rises in my throat as I consider my daughter, Grace. Wouldn't she hate me for this? She likely already harbors resentment after the events of the previous week. I can't take this pain anymore, I whisper, feeling as if my very essence is draining away. Just a week prior, I would have fought tooth and nail to survive, but now I feel utterly broken, unwanted, and despised. The pain has settled into my wrists, but has dulled enough to leave me in a daze. As I drift into a deep sleep, I harbor expectations of experiencing something, perhaps a flash of my life, a guiding light, or even an enveloping darkness, but instead, I find nothing. What I truly realize, as the blackness begins to consume me, is that despite my desire to survive, it feels too late. With each passing moment, I feel the last remnants of my strength fade away. Just a week ago, I was laughing heartily with Grace, spinning her around our home in Perth, Australia. She was 19, radiant with joy, and had just received a marriage proposal from her boyfriend, John. "Dad, he proposed," she exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with excitement. I had sensed it was coming and had wholeheartedly given my blessing, knowing how serious their relationship had been since middle school. My heart swelled with happiness for them. Grace eagerly recounted the story of the proposal, describing a treasure hunt orchestrated by John that culminated in his heartfelt question beneath a tree in Kings Park. The joy radiating from her was infectious, and I hugged her tightly, twirling her around in celebration. The next day in the kitchen, I reassured her, emphasizing that despite their youth, their love was undoubtedly strong. As I admired the engagement ring adorning her hand, I smiled and remarked, "It's beautiful, Gracie," before turning to John, expressing my approval. "You did a great job picking it out." Nearby, Kelly, still a stunning woman at 42 with her brown hair and warm eyes, raised her wine glass in mock pride, stating, "You should thank me, I helped John choose it." Grace's reaction was quick and defensive. "Mom, that was inappropriate." Kelly brushed it off, responding, "It's okay, sweetie. I know you made the final choice." Yet, in that moment, I felt an uncomfortable twinge. Kelly had been exhibiting strange behaviors over the past few months. Little comments and actions had begun to cast a shadow over the loving spouse I had known. As we continued to celebrate Grace's engagement with a festive dinner, I was unable to shake off the disquiet that stemmed from Kelly's words. The following morning, as Kelly and I stirred awake, ready to embrace an intimate moment, she suddenly pulled away, retreating to the bathroom without any explanation. "Kelly?" I called out, confusion and concern blooming in my chest. "What's the matter?" Nothing could have prepared me for the emotional unraveling that lay ahead. She replied, "Is there anything for me?" A minute later, she added, "I'm already getting cleaned up." The shock of her words hit me hard, and as I took a shower to clear my head, I stumbled upon a note in the kitchen. It simply stated that she was leaving for the day. A surge of anger boiled inside me, fueled by years of shared experiences and trust that seemed to have vanished in an instant. In all the years I had been with Kelly, I had never encountered such blatant disrespect from her. Questions began to swirl in my mind, particularly the thought that maybe she was cheating on me. I was adrift in a sea of uncertainty when my phone rang, breaking my troubled reverie. "It's Roger, my friend, on the line." "Hey Bart, what's up?" he asked, his tone cheerful as always. I could barely muster a response, replying with a curt, "Nothing much," while doing my best to conceal my unease. As if he could sense my internal struggle, he pressed on, "Something's off." His intuition was sharp. For the next 10 minutes, I poured out my concerns about Kelly's unusual behavior, detailing how her actions were leaving me reeling. Roger chuckled lightly, attempting to inject some humor into the situation. "If she's cheating, there's not much you can do about it," he said matter-of-factly. "Divorce is 50-50, and she's out of work. She'll take you to the cleaners." His words only stoked the flames of my annoyance. "That's not helping," I retorted, feeling frustrated. "I'm just being realistic," he replied. "Let's talk tomorrow at work, we have that report on the Pembroke project due, and we can discuss this afterward." I agreed, albeit without much enthusiasm. Roger and I had formed an effective partnership at work, me as the senior engineer and he as the program manager. Our strengths complemented each other well. Somehow, I managed to muddle through that Sunday. Kelly returned late, nearly at midnight, and she didn't utter a single word, fully aware that I was awake. The following day, she attempted to act as if nothing was amiss. It was infuriating. "It's not going to happen, Kelly," I declared as I got out of bed, my tone firm. "No?" she asked, taken aback. I began dressing for work, my mind still reeling from the weekend. "After your disrespect last weekend, I can't, if you're cheating on me," I trailed off, my thoughts tangled. She laughed derisively, her eyes glinting with disdain. "What are you going to do, Bartholomew? There's nothing you can do." Her tone softened slightly, but it remained laced with mockery. "Come on, just go back to bed. We both need this." I shook my head in disbelief. "Who are you? You can't treat me like this, Kelly. The contempt you're showing is unbelievable." Her response was immediate, a venomous retort, "Well, screw you." Filled with disgust towards my wife, a feeling that was foreign to me after 21 years of marriage, I left the room. At the office that morning, my stress was palpable. My assistant, Myra, noticed immediately. "Bart, you okay? You seem off," she said, concern etched across her face. Myra had been with me for a decade. When she first joined the team, she had recently escaped a tumultuous relationship, showing up to her interview with a black eye. Despite her past, she was more than qualified for the job, intelligent, capable, and far more than just a pretty face. Over the years, I had come to respect her not only for her professional capabilities but also for her strong moral compass and resolve. After a moment's hesitation, I decided to confide in her about my troubling situation with Kelly. As I spoke, I could see Myra's expression shift from concern to anger on my behalf. "I don't know what to do, Myra," I admitted, the weight of defeat settling heavily in my chest. "If she's cheating on me, I never saw it coming." In a rare moment of physical comfort, Myra placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder. "First, let's get through the Pembroke meeting. There are some issues with the pipes and concrete," she advised, deftly shifting the focus back to work. "What? Why didn't Roger mention this?" I asked, already starting to think about how to tackle the situation. Just then, Roger popped into my office, wearing his trademark smile. "You ready, buddy?" he asked. I was about to reply when I pressed him further about the issues with the pipes and concrete. "Don't worry," he said nonchalantly, "we'll sort it out." But when we entered the meeting, things took a turn for the worse. The Pembroke owners, who were usually friendly, were visibly agitated as I delivered my progress report. Their expressions darkened as I spoke. Peter, the CEO, pointedly asked about the overruns in concrete and pipe costs in the northeast area. I glanced at Roger, but he only shrugged, leaving me feeling unequipped. Under the weight of their scrutiny, I stammered, "I'll need to check last week's figures." Everything showed within budget. Peter's frown deepened, his annoyance escalating. "Then why have I signed off on over $200,000 in extra costs for concrete and pipes over the last 3 months? I was stunned, looking to Roger again for guidance. His expression was inscrutable. He suggested we step outside to discuss the matter in another. They inquired about the missing materials, a situation we had anticipated. Roger's demeanor was grave, signaling the seriousness of the discussion at hand. Clarence turned to me, his expression filled with fury, and nearly spat his words. "What are you saying, Bartholomew?" The sharpness of his tone caught me off guard, leaving me momentarily speechless. I managed to respond, "Sir, I've been informed everything was on track. I didn't approve any extra costs." Clarence then flung open a folder with a definitive motion, fixing me with a glare that sent chills down my spine. "So this is the story you're sticking to?" he demanded with an edge of incredulity and anger. I was left bewildered as Roger, now adopting a serious tone, interjected, "We have requisitions for $26,000. The payments were directed to a bank account in your name." The gravity of Roger's accusation hit me hard. After all these years, to have my integrity questioned in such a way felt like a betrayal. Clarence's voice rose further, practically a shout. "After all these years, this is how you repay me?" Each word seemed to pierce through my resolve, and I could sense the situation spiraling out of control. The meeting, intended to be a routine check-in, abruptly turned into a hostile interrogation, with Clarence and Roger taking turns hurling accusations of fraud at me. Their refusal to accept my innocence felt suffocating. Eventually, the atmosphere became too charged to continue, and the meeting concluded with dire consequences. They summoned HR, and in a matter of moments, I found myself fired on the spot. Clarence's parting words were laced with threats. He vowed to involve the police, which only served to heighten my anxiety. To add insult to injury, Myra, my close colleague, was also let go, unjustly linked to my alleged misdeeds. As I was escorted out with only a handful of my belongings, I caught a glimpse of Roger smirking, a clear indication of his satisfaction in my downfall. Outside, I found Myra by her car, tears streaming down her face, clearly overwhelmed by the whirlwind of events. "Myra, you okay?" I managed to ask, but she spun around with an intensity that startled me. "You prick, Bartholomew. You committed $200,000 in fraud and ruined my job. I trusted you." Her voice was laced with betrayal, and I felt my heart sink further. "It wasn't me, Myra," I pleaded, desperate to defend myself, but she cut me off. "I saw the signed papers with your signature. How could you? Was your story about Kelly cheating a lie too? You've destroyed my career." The fury radiating from Myra was palpable, and in a moment of raw emotion, she slapped me hard, calling me a liar and a thief before driving away. Stunned, I climbed into my car and drove home, where Kelly awaited my return. The tension in the air was thick with animosity, and she greeted me with a sneer. "The cheating husband returns. Pathetic." In the days following the explosive meeting, I noticed a chilling change in her demeanor. She appeared almost pleased with the chaos surrounding me. Confused and seeking answers, I confronted her. "What's going on, Kelly? I didn't do any of this." To my shock, she grinned with a disturbing satisfaction. "It doesn't matter, Bart. I'm done with you." Just then, a sharp knock at the door interrupted our confrontation. A man stood on the threshold, handing me a thick envelope, stating, "You've been served," before departing. I opened it to reveal divorce papers, the implications stark and brutal. "Kelly? A divorce?" I whispered, my heart sinking as I felt my world crumble further. "Of course," she replied, her laughter echoing in my ears. "I've been seeing someone else for months. He's everything you're not, interesting and with money. You've lost your job, your family, and soon your freedom." Admitting defeat, I expressed my disbelief, confirming, "So you're staying with your lover?" She laughed again, a sound that cut deep. "Yes, and once you're in jail, we'll be renting out the place. Don't even think about stalking me, or I'll have you arrested." I sat down, overwhelmed by the weight of betrayal and despair. Kelly noticed the handprint Myra had left on my face and smiled cruelly. "At least that strumpet got fired too. Go die in a hole, Bartholomew," she sneered before leaving. I spent the rest of that day in a daze, unable to process the gravity of what had just transpired. I didn't even seek solace in alcohol. Instead, I remained numb. The following day, still uncertain and searching for some semblance of clarity, I attempted to call Grace, but the call went straight to voicemail after ringing nearly 20 times. Eventually, she answered, her tone icy. "What do you want?" she asked, devoid of any warmth. "Grace, I began, but she cut me off, her anger palpable. "Just stop, Dad. Mom told me everything about your cheating, lying, and affair with your assistant. You've ruined so many lives, and I've never been more disappointed in anyone." My mind raced, scrambling for a response, but words eluded me. As I tried to articulate my feelings, she interrupted me again. "Listen, John, and I want nothing to do with you. You were on the news, the police are after you. Don't come to our wedding. I don't want a. I stood there, frozen in place, grappling with the weight of my circumstances. A court date loomed the following week back in my hometown, compelling me to remain in the area, even though every fiber of my being longed to escape. The walls around me echoed with memories held captive in family photographs and the impressive trophies that Grace had earned throughout her life. These tokens of celebration, once brimming with joy, felt painfully hollow. The past week had accelerated into a disorienting blur, and deep within, I realized something vital was amiss. Yet, I could not articulate what that something was. Tragedy had struck with the force of a tidal wave, leaving devastation in its wake. My wife had walked out of my life, my daughter had turned her back on me in anger and disappointment, and I had lost my job, a situation compounded by Myra's blame directed at me. Even friends, those I believed would stand by me, had distanced themselves, insisting that I keep away from them. The isolation was suffocating, a potent reminder of my defeat and helplessness as I contemplated the uncertainty of my future. As an engineer, I had always prided myself on my ability to solve problems efficiently and effectively, but now I confronted a labyrinth of despair that felt insurmountable. After forcing myself to endure a shower, an act that did little to cleanse my turmoil, I consumed a stale sandwich that sat in the fridge, its taste only deepening my sense of hopelessness. The reality of Grace cutting me out of her life stung deeply. It was the hardest blow to accept. My gaze fell upon the kitchen table, where a bottle of sleeping pills and an unfinished drink perched ominously. For the first time, dark thoughts began to unfurl in my mind, whispering of potential escape. But I managed to shake them off, telling myself I simply needed more time. The following morning, reality struck again with the arrival of a restraining order that barred me from any contact with Kelly, John, or Roger, along with a demand to vacate my home by the upcoming Monday. I found it peculiar that Roger, a supposed friend, was included in this order. A realization ignited a spark of rage within me. In an impulsive fit, I typed out a furious message to him. "You prick, this is all your fault. I'm going to find you and destroy you." No response came, but shortly after, detectives appeared at my door, reprimanding me for my violation of the restraining order. Their indifference to my explanation was palpable. They seemed intent solely on ensuring my confinement. They instructed me to remain in the house while packing my belongings, leaving one detective to monitor my actions. Frustration and despair mingled fiercely within me, and I downed 3 shots of alcohol as I sought a release. Determined to voice my feelings, I began drafting letters to the 2 women who had once been central to my life, along with a note for Myra. To Kelly, my words turned venomous. I expressed my profound disappointment, calling her a traitorous strumpet and wishing her nothing but misery for the pain she had inflicted on me. My anger poured out, each curse filled with the weight of betrayal, leading me to punctuate the letter with a spit before sealing it in an envelope. In stark contrast, my letter to Grace dripped with sadness. I lamented that she had never paused to ask whether I was guilty of the accusations against me. I reiterated my innocence, clarifying that I had never cheated on her mother. It was she who had betrayed me. I implored her to sift through the lies and urged her to grow up, to embrace love and joy fully, while also asking her not to let Roger walk her down the aisle. Tears fell as I sealed that letter, each drop a testament to my heartache. My letter to Myra began with an apology. I expressed that she was not to blame for the current strife and explained my belief that Roger had deceived us both, possibly even involving himself with my wife. I acknowledged any discomfort I may have caused her, clarifying that my glances were merely an acknowledgement of her beauty. I sought her forgiveness, hoping that one day she would understand. Once the letters were finished, I placed them on the bedside table and attached a post-it note for the detectives, urging them to investigate Roger's finances if they truly wanted to uncover the truth. I challenged them directly, demanding they do their job properly instead of driving an innocent man to this state of despair. Gathering the lingering remnants of my composure, I took the bottle of alcohol and sleeping pills into the bedroom. I took a long, hot shower before swallowing the pills and sipping more booze, dressing neatly for the occasion as if that mattered. When I collapsed onto the floor near the bathroom, a straight razor in hand, I contemplated the unthinkable. I was consumed by feelings of becoming unwanted and despised, trapped in a painful existence. Later, I was informed that Detective David Wright had come to my aid after being alerted by a concerned neighbor. He entered my home to find me in dire need of help, and an ambulance was summoned quickly, turning my home into a crime scene. I was in a critical state, barely conscious, when they found me and rushed me to safety. The investigation revealed 3 hidden cameras I had no knowledge of, along with the alcohol and pill bottle, as well as my letters. I lay in unconsciousness for 3 long days. When I finally awoke, a nurse quietly informed me that I was in a private hospital in Hollywood. My eyes fell on Myra, who had remained steadfastly by my side through it all. Seeing her awake, I quietly uttered her name, and she stirred immediately, grasping my hand. "Bart, what were you?" It would be better this way, I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper as the weight of the moment settled heavily around us. Myra, sitting across from me, overwhelmed with an intense shame, snorted in disbelief. You think ending your life is the answer, she challenged, her tone sharp yet laced with concern. I've known you for over a decade, and I've never seen you give up so easily. What were you thinking? Myra kept pressing, her voice steady as we sat in the sterile silence of the hospital room, accompanied only by the soft hum of the machines that monitored my fragile state. Finally, it felt like the moment warranted a response. Myra, I'm so sorry, I began, my words tumbling out in a rush. When Kelly, you, and Grace turned against me, I felt completely trapped. No one even bothered to ask if I was guilty or not, I was just condemned without any consideration. My wife told me to die. My daughter disowned me. My friend betrayed me, and in turn, I hurt you. I paused to take a breath, the memories washing over me like a tidal wave. I wasn't thinking clearly. I got drunk, and in a moment of weakness, I did what seemed right at the time. But I shouldn't be here, I said, the last words coming out in a sad whisper. She nodded slowly, her expression shifting as she gently sat on the edge of the bed, her gaze locked onto mine. I'm sorry too, Bart, she whispered, her voice trembling as tears began to form in her eyes. I was angry, and I didn't consider the possibility that you might be innocent. I was wrong. It's okay, Myra, I replied softly, wanting to ease her discomfort. No, it's not okay, she insisted, shaking her head. The fact that you're here, thinking I'm somehow part of what drove you to this. I don't know if I can forgive myself. As she started to cry, I felt an overwhelming ache in my chest. It's okay, Myra, I repeated, closing my eyes, utterly exhausted by the emotional toll of our conversation. We sat there in silence, her hand gently holding mine, providing a fragile comfort until the peaceful moment was interrupted by a doctor entering the room. His smile seemed out of place in the heavy atmosphere. Well, Mr. Other, it's good to see you awake. How are you feeling? He asked, glancing at my chart. Alive, I replied, a bitter edge creeping into my voice. Didn't expect to be. The doctor's brow furrowed, mirroring Myra's concern. Let's work on keeping you that way, he said, downplaying my dark comment. He checked my stitches and assessed my vitals, while Myra looked on, gasping at the sight of my wounds. The doctor explained that I needed to take it easy due to the significant blood loss and the effects of the stomach pumping. He also mentioned that a detective wanted to speak with me once we were alone again. Turning to Myra, I asked, are you here because of my letter? She shook her head. No, I haven't seen it. Detective Wright told me about it, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. My cousin works here and called me when you were admitted after your attempt. I struggled to meet her gaze, the overwhelming shame pooling within me. Myra continued, I was still angry when I left, but deep down, I knew you couldn't have done it. I've worked alongside you for years, and when I heard what happened, I realized you had been set up. I'm so sorry, Bart, she sobbed, her head resting on my chest as tears soaked my hospital gown. After a few moments, she stood up, wiping her face with trembling hands. When she tried to pull her hand away from mine, I held on tighter. She gently wiped the tears from my eyes and smiled at me, but I could see the pain etched there. I thought about it more and realized it didn't make sense, she said, her tone shifting as if trying to piece together a puzzle. You always loved your job. But when Roger showed me the documents, I was furious. Her eyes darted to mine, noticing how I tensed at the mention of Roger. It was him, wasn't it? Roger set you up. I nodded in response. I think so. I can't prove it, but the signs are there. He didn't warn us about the overspending, and there are signed documents I've never seen before. I also suspect he's involved with Kelly. I paused, my eyes closed as I held Myra's hand. I'm sorry, Myra. I never thought Roger and Kelly would pull you into this mess, but I can't prove my innocence, which is why I did what I did. Our conversation fell into a heavy silence until a new voice broke through. You're right, you can't prove it. They did a good job framing you, but real criminals don't act like this. The man who entered the room was large and fit, exuding an air of confidence. Mr. Other, I'm Detective David Wright. I, along with your neighbor, Mrs. Hawkins, found you. Glad to see you're feeling better. I shrugged in response. Thanks, but I'm sure you'll be arresting me when I'm released, I said bitterly, feeling Myra grip my hand tighter. About that, Detective Wright began, and Myra and I looked at him intently as he ran his hand through his hair. I have been assigned to your case, and upon reviewing the details, I've come to the realization that several aspects do not seem to align. Would you be open to undergoing another interview? I believe it could be beneficial. With a sense of resignation, I replied, I think so. I've got nothing left to lose. Just then, Myra interjected, her voice filled with concern. What about a lawyer? Shouldn't he have one? The detective let out a weary sigh and confirmed, yes, he should have a lawyer, and that's definitely a good idea. Myra nodded in understanding, then declared, I'll take care of it. She left the room, making a call as the detective and I exchanged glances, watching her go. Detective Wright broke the silence, remarking, she cares about you a lot, Mr. Other. I think you need people on your side right now. I couldn't help but remind him, I'm the one you're investigating. He flashed a grin and replied, true, but I think there's more to this case than meets the eye. You do believe you're innocent, don't you? I affirmed vigorously, absolutely. I'd never steal from a company I loved working for. As I spoke, I gestured to my bandaged wrists, a physical manifestation of my distress. At that moment, Myra returned, announcing, my cousin Reagan Brown will be representing you, Bart. The detective's demeanor shifted to one of approval as he remarked, I know Reagan, she's a good lawyer. Have her contact me as soon as possible. We exchanged a few more words before the detective exited, leaving me to process the unusual nature of our interaction. I remarked to Myra, that was unusual, to which she agreed, responding, yeah, cops aren't usually this friendly. A comfortable silence filled the room until I broke it with a question about Tilly's well-being. Who's looking after Tilly? I asked. My mom's got her, Myra replied, handing me a drawing Tilly made, a whimsical depiction of a hospital scene accompanied by a heartfelt, get well soon, message. The drawing tugged at my heartstrings, and tears welled in my eyes. Thank you, I said, overwhelmed by the gesture. In a softer tone, I asked, have you heard from Grace? Myra shook her head, her expression turning sorrowful. I've tried calling, but no response, she admitted. Our conversation continued quietly until Reagan arrived. After exchanging pleasantries and introductions, Myra stepped out, leaving me alone with my new attorney. Reagan, resembling Myra with her sandy brown hair and striking features, quickly broke the ice. She likes you, you know, she said, echoing the detective's earlier sentiments. I scoffed lightly, insisting, we've worked together for years. Reagan smirked knowingly, remarking, men can be clueless. I laughed, albeit without humor, and added, I think my ex-wife proves that. Reagan offered me a sad smile, her understanding evident. Don't worry, she reassured me. I've talked to Detective Wright, and it seems he's on your side. I have some theories about what's going on, and I'll handle your case. Your only crime was trusting the wrong people. She then broached the delicate subject of my divorce, asking, what do you want from it? My expression darkened as I replied, I want as much as I can get. Reagan's expression turned serious as she acknowledged the gravity of the situation. Kelly and Roger set you up, possibly stole from the firm, and left you to take the fall. You have every right to go after them with everything you've got. Don't hold back. I found myself appreciating my new lawyer. Reagan took the time to listen, asking about the events that led up to my self-harm and providing the reassurance I desperately needed. She explained that she would contact me for a formal police interview once I was released from the hospital. The subsequent days dragged on, filled with the monotony of hospital life. Doctors and nurses checked in on me regularly, but without my phone, I felt isolated, unsure of who would even want to hear from me. Myra visited the next day, bringing a paperback copy of Demi by Dan Simmons, a book that sparked fond memories. I chuckled as I recognized it as one I had enjoyed years ago. As Myra sat beside me, engrossed in her own reading of Pride and Prejudice, she smiled warmly and assured me, I'm here to look after you. We chatted casually, and at lunchtime, she surprised me with a delightful meal of roast beef and chips, while she opted for a chicken wrap. Despite the pain in my wrists, I began to feel a semblance of my former self again. Later, Myra returned just as the doctors were removing my fall and informing me that I would likely be discharged the next morning, provided my blood tests came back clear. I expressed my concerns to her, saying, I don't know where to go. I don't have a phone or wallet to get a hotel, and I can't go home. Myra's smile brightened as she informed me Reagan got a court order to access your belongings. I brought your phone, wallet, clothes, laptop, iPad, and shaving supplies. I was taken aback by her thoughtfulness and kindness. Thank you. Now I can at least find a hotel, I replied gratefully. However, I noticed a hint of worry lingering in her expression. What's wrong? I inquired. Her voice dropped as she responded, you were. She smiled slightly despite the chaos surrounding us, as a group of people yelled at me to leave. Their voices were filled with anger and resentment, but before their threats could escalate further, the officer intervened, warning them that they could face arrest for violating a court order. In that tense moment, I handed her things back, and tears began to well up in her eyes. The memory of the blood stain on the carpet haunted her, a haunting reminder of everything that had transpired. "Don't ever do that again," she pleaded, her voice trembling with emotion. I assured her, "I promise," as I held up my hands, bandaged and still raw from the incidents. The following day, after being freshly cleaned up, Myra was there to meet me as I was discharged from the care facility. We walked together toward her car, the air between us filled with a mixture of relief and uncertainty. She drove me to a condo complex in Kings Park, where I felt a surge of curiosity. "Myra, why are we here?" I asked, a hint of desperation creeping into my voice. "Can I stay at your place?" She turned to me, her expression warm, and replied, "Of course you can. You don't need to spend money on a hotel. You can stay in my guest room for a few days." The kindness in her smile was a balm for my soul. She explained, "Reagan is meeting us this afternoon to discuss your case." I had visited Myra's house before. It was a cozy two-story home she shared with her daughter, Tilly, filled with an inviting warmth that made me feel safe. Once we settled in, Reagan arrived promptly, carrying legal documents and a serious demeanor. "Bart, you're a very lucky man," she said, her tone grave yet hopeful. She detailed how Roger and Kelly had almost succeeded in their plans to ruin me, but fortunate circumstances had unraveled their scheme. My accounts had been frozen, including one that they had fraudulently opened in my name. Reagan had gathered video evidence of them in the act, and she was actively pursuing legal action against them for fraud and mental cruelty. She assured me that they would soon face the consequences of their actions. In addition, Reagan informed us that she had initiated legal proceedings against my former employer for unfair dismissal. She expressed optimism that everything would be resolved by the end of that week and arranged for a formal interview with Detective Wright for the following day, urging me to follow her instructions closely. She was confident that my wife, along with Roger, would be arrested soon. Over the next hour, we discussed details and signed various documents, with Reagan reassuring me that all charges against me would be dropped the next day. After Reagan left, I took the time to unpack my clothes and toiletries. Myra and I spent the afternoon deep in conversation about what might unfold in the days ahead. When Myra left to pick up Tilly from school, I decided to turn on my phone for the first time in days. A flood of missed calls and texts greeted me, mostly from Kelly, taunting me with demands to sign the divorce papers before I ended up in jail. Among the notifications, I also noticed several missed calls from my former employer, asking me to get in touch. Strangely, there was nothing from Grace. When Myra and Tilly returned, Tilly burst through the door, eager to share the tales of her day, her energy contagious and uplifting. I found joy in helping her with her homework and reading together. She reminded me so much of Myra, and her innocent laughter was a welcome reprieve from my overwhelming worries. We sat down for dinner, and afterward, we curled up on the couch to watch TV together. Before bedtime, Tilly asked me to put her to bed, and when she hugged me, a wave of emotion hit me, almost bringing tears to my eyes. Her genuine affection stood in stark contrast to the pain of Grace's rejection. After Tilly drifted off, Myra and I sat on the couch talking. She held my hand and wrapped her arms around me, offering comfort and assurance that everything would be okay. The next day, following the interview with Detective Wright and Reagan, all charges against me were indeed dropped. That evening, the news reported that Kelly and Roger had warrants issued for their arrest due to fraud and identity theft, but they appeared to have vanished, evading capture. Later that night, Grace called for the first time, but I chose to let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to talk to her. The following day, her calls and texts became more frequent, pleading for me to call her back, but I remained unresponsive. Her sudden concern felt insincere, as if it were only a reaction to the fallout caused by her mother and Roger's actions. Anger simmered within me. It felt unfair that she had abandoned me so easily and was now reaching out only when her own life was impacted. That night, I was haunted by a nightmare that forced me to relive the darkest moments of my life, the night I had hurt myself. In my dream, Kelly and Roger's mocking voices echoed around me, joined by Grace and John, leaving me to suffer alone. I woke up screaming, drenched in sweat, my heart racing. Myra rushed to my side, with Tilly standing in the doorway, her small form trembling as she cried. I buried my head in my hands, overwhelmed with emotion. "I'm sorry. I can't do this," I managed to say, trying to gather my thoughts. Myra and Tilly climbed onto the bed with me, offering warmth and comfort. Tilly, in her sweet, innocent way, reassured me, saying, "It's all right, Uncle Bart. You just had a bad dream." Mom and beside me, Myra's hand rested gently on my stomach, her fingers warm and reassuring, filling the space with a sense of calm that I desperately needed. She gazed at me, her eyes filled with concern, and the softness of her expression made my heart swell. "Are you okay, Bart?" she asked gently, pulling me closer to her, offering the comfort of her presence. I paused, contemplating the swirling emotions inside me. No, I'm not okay, I finally admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. It was the truth. I had been haunted by a dream about that terrible night, one that eluded my ability to fully comprehend or escape. Myra, understanding without needing further explanation, leaned in and kissed my cheek. She nestled into the crook of my neck, her breath warm against my skin. "What are we going to do, Bart?" she whispered, her voice imbued with pain that resonated deep within me. As I wrapped my arms around both Myra and Tilly, who slept peacefully nearby, I sought to reassure us. "We'll figure it out," I replied, holding them tightly. "It'll be okay." In that moment, Myra's concern provided a comforting balm. It made me feel more like myself than I had since that fateful evening. I held them close until the sun began to rise, feeling a flicker of hope ignite within me for the first time in days. The next morning unfolded quietly after breakfast. Myra took Tilly to school, and the house lay still as I sat with my thoughts. I recognized that I needed help. The shadows of that night loomed too large. I began searching for a counselor, determined to reclaim my life. By the time Myra returned home, I had already made several calls. She caught my eye and smiled, but her demeanor shifted as she said, "Bart, can we talk?" Leading me to the couch, I sensed the seriousness in her tone. I nodded, bracing myself for what I anticipated was a conversation about my recent nightmares. "It's okay, Myra," I reassured her. "I know last night was scary, especially with Tilly here. It's not good if I'm waking up screaming. I'll find somewhere else." Her eyes widened in alarm, and she quickly grasped my hands, panic etched on her face. "No, Bart. That's not what I wanted to talk about. It's actually the opposite." She inhaled deeply, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Bartley, I'm in love with you." The admission hung in the air, and I was momentarily stunned. "Excuse me?" I stammered, processing her declaration. "I'm in love with you and have been for a long time," she repeated, her voice softer now, tinged with embarrassment as she blushed. She searched my face for understanding as she continued, "When I heard you were in the hospital, I went crazy with worry. I couldn't stand the thought of losing you without telling you how I felt." I sat in silence, absorbing her words. She had been carrying this weight alone for too long. "I tried to keep it to myself," she confessed, "but seeing you hurt last night broke my heart. I had to tell you." My mind raced as she continued, "Have you noticed that I don't go on dates?" I nodded, still confused, assuming it was due to her commitments with Tilly. She smiled softly, acknowledging my assumption. "That's partly true, but it's also because no one else measures up to you." Myra went on to explain how she had admired me from the moment she started working with me. The way I treated her with respect, how I helped her navigate challenges, and how I made Tilly feel special resonated with her deeply. "You've been like a father figure to her," she said, her voice steady yet filled with emotion. "When everything fell apart last week, you handled it with grace. You didn't lash out, even when I did." I remembered how she had slapped me in anger, but I never held it against her. "You're an amazing man, Bart," she continued, her sincerity brightening the room. "I love you for so many reasons. If Kelly was foolish enough to throw you away, I'm here to pick you up." And then, in a moment that felt transcendent, she kissed me. Time came to a standstill, and I found myself completely overwhelmed. Though I had fantasized about her before, this moment was real and filled with possibilities. "Will you take me, Bart? Will you make me your woman?" Myra asked, her eyes hopeful yet vulnerable. Stunned by the suddenness of it all, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. I had known things with Kelly were over, yet Myra's love made me feel less like a failure. Still, a lingering fear crept in, that this new beginning could backfire. Myra seemed to sense my hesitation, but she didn't push. Instead, she simply took my hand and led me to her bedroom, where we shared a quiet intimacy that enveloped us like a warm blanket. Afterward, we fell asleep, and I drifted into another dream akin to the tormenting one I'd experienced before. In this dream, Kelly and Roger tormented me, but this time Myra appeared, healing my wounds with her touch and flying away, lifting me from the heavy shadows of anxiety and sorrow. When the alarm jolted us awake, I shuddered but didn't scream. As we dressed, I recounted the dream to Myra, and her expression of concern mirrored the depth of her empathy. That day, she took me with her to pick up Tilly from school. A month later, Myra Reagan and I found ourselves in the courtroom, where we stood side by side to testify against Kelly and Roger. The atmosphere in the room was heavy with tension. Throughout the proceedings, Roger avoided making any eye contact with me, his body language betraying a sense of guilt and shame. He was ultimately sentenced to 15 years in prison, a verdict that felt both just and insufficient for the pain he had caused. On the other hand, Kelly's gaze was unwavering. She kept her eyes locked on me, a mixture of regret and defiance etched across her face. As the trial progressed, it became increasingly clear that Roger had orchestrated the entire fraudulent scheme. He had seduced Kelly, manipulating her emotions in such a calculated manner that it left everyone stunned. The court heard the details of how he had drawn her in and then carefully planned the deceit that followed. The jury determined Kelly's role in the scheme as an accessory, leading to her being sentenced to 20 years, along with an additional 5 years for the mental cruelty inflicted upon me. The evidence of hidden cameras that she had set up on Roger's behalf was indisputable, portraying a chilling narrative of betrayal. After the verdict was delivered, the judge granted our divorce, a conclusion that had been anticipated but still felt surreal. Reagan, my attorney, took care to outline the specifics. We would divide our savings fairly, and it was agreed that the house would be sold, with the proceeds shared equitably. In a turn of events I did not expect, I was persuaded by Reagan to act as trustee for Kelly's funds during her incarceration. Although I would be unable to access her funds, I could invest them on her behalf, a decision driven by a complex blend of empathy and obligation. The court mandated that both Roger and Kelly begin serving their sentences immediately. As the proceedings concluded, Kelly's lawyer made an unusual request. She asked that I spend an hour with Kelly before her transfer to jail. After contemplating the implications of such a meeting, I reluctantly agreed. In the sterile confines of the interrogation room, the atmosphere was drastically different from the courtroom. Kelly appeared defeated, her shoulders slumped as she struggled to face the reality of her actions. Unlike during the trial, she avoided meeting my gaze. The silence stretched between us until she finally broke it, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, Bartley." I was taken aback by her initiation of the conversation and the bare sincerity in her words. "Are you, Kelly?" I asked, letting a hint of bitterness seep into my tone. She looked up at me, tears welling in her eyes, confirming, "Yes, Bart, I'm sorry." I wanted to dismiss her apology, but she seemed desperate to continue, and I gestured for her to go on. "Thank you," she said, her eyes now locked onto mine. "Believe it or not, Bart, I'm sorry. I don't know what happened to me. I loved you and still do, despite everything I did. One day, I just woke up with this overwhelming feeling of loss that I can't explain." Her gaze fell to her hands as she continued, "A few weeks after that first feeling, everything spiraled out of control. I got angry at you because you still loved me, even when I didn't feel the same. Roger noticed my vulnerability and began to manipulate my feelings." She described how it took a month for the affair to begin, how Roger preyed upon her insecurities, using them to gain her trust and ultimately lead her into betrayal. "You may not have known this," she admitted, "but Roger was always jealous of you, your leadership, your success. He convinced me to open a bank account in your name, making it seem as if you stole money." Her voice shook as she recounted the details, saying, "We both knew you were trusted, and Roger had a plan for us to escape with the money, thinking we would be untouchable if the scheme unraveled." It was a mind-boggling confession that left me struggling to contain my anger. "And meanwhile, you didn't care that you were destroying me," I shot back, my voice thick with emotion. Kelly nodded sadly, her expression filled with regret. "At first, I didn't want to do any of it, but Roger broke me down piece by piece. He made it so that to execute the plan, you had to be completely broken." "You nearly succeeded," I replied, my voice steady but filled with an underlying rage. "If it weren't for Detective Roundlight and Myra, you might have." We sat in silence, the weight of our shared history heavy in the air. After a moment, Kelly asked, "Can I see them?" Understanding the request, I placed my scarred hands on the cold table. She gasped, her instinct to reach out tempered by hesitation. Tears streamed down her face as she processed the consequences of her actions. Inside, I was overwhelmed by a tumult of emotions, rage, shame, and unexpectedly, a lingering shred of love for her. Kelly seemed to sense my inner conflict and looked at me intensely. "I'm really sorry, Bart. I'm ashamed of what I did. I'm going to serve my 20 years without appeal. I deserve it." I nodded, feeling a sense of relief that she was willing to face her punishment. "Just so you know," she added, her voice shaky yet earnest, "you were never a bad lover. You were far better than Roger. He was selfish in bed, unlike you. I have no excuse for how I treated you that last morning." There was a moment of quiet reflection before she asked about Myra. "You and Myra?" she inquired, her tone a mixture of hope and curiosity. "Yeah. Kelly, I once loved you more profoundly than you ever realized. If only you had taken a moment to open up to me about your feelings, we might have been able to sidestep the turmoil that unfolded between us. Despite my efforts to move beyond the hurt caused by your actions, I find myself grappling with a deep-seated anger. A part of me yearns to scream at you, to express the fury that simmers within me, to confront you physically for the words you spoke that cut so deeply. Yet here I am, unable to act on those impulses. I made the choice to end my life, and now that decision weighs heavily on my conscience, a burden I must carry indefinitely. We sat in silence for a moment, the air thick with unspoken tension. Then, with a steady voice, Kelly broke the stillness. I'm sorry, Bart. You deserved so much better than what I allowed myself to give you. I share in the guilt of pushing you too far, and that knowledge will forever haunt me. She looked down, shame creeping into her voice as she continued. I saw the letter you wrote, and you were right. I will burn for what I did, but I thank God that you're still here, still alive. I clenched my teeth, wrestling with the whirlwind of emotions swirling around inside me. How could Kelly say all of this now? It felt as if she was trying to alleviate the anger and pain I still clung to, and it didn't seem fair. Wanting to shift the focus away from the heartache, I changed the subject. I can manage your money out of respect for our years together. You'll have enough to start over when you're out, if that's what you want. My voice trembled slightly, betraying the emotions I was attempting to suppress. Kelly seemed to notice my struggle but played along with the change of topic, laughing bitterly. I'll be in my 60s by then, hopefully, there will be enough for me to retire. But if you keep at it, you might just make it to 80. We briefly discussed our finances, a topic that momentarily eased the tension between us. However, I could sense she had more to reveal. Have you talked to Grace? She asked hesitantly. I shook my head, feeling the weight of her question. Grace cut me off after accepting your lies, and that crushed me. She didn't even ask if I was innocent, she just tossed me aside after that call. I turned away to hide the tears streaming down my face, unaware that Kelly was doing the same, facing away from me. Myra had tried to reach out to Grace while I was in the hospital, but there was nothing to show for it. I wiped my face and settled back into my chair, while Kelly mirrored my movements. I'm sorry, Bart, she said, her expression twisted with regret. Roger and I orchestrated this, including turning Grace against you. I nodded, anger flaring within me as she admitted to her part in my estrangement from our daughter. She hung her head in shame, fully aware that her choices had severed my relationship with Grace. If it's any consolation, Kelly uttered sorrowfully, Grace has cut me off too. She's angry and scared, and I can't fix this. She feels guilty about how she treated you, and the fact that you're not talking to her only makes things worse. There was a pause before she continued. Bart, I know I don't have the right to ask for anything, but could you find it in your heart to forgive Grace? She needs at least one parent. The weight of her words settled heavily in the room. I realize now that even if I weren't in prison, the guilt of what I did would have destroyed me. Please, Bart, take care of our daughter. Taking a deep breath, I struggled to find my voice. What you're asking is incredibly difficult. You've hurt me deeply, but when Grace told me I was dead to her, that cut deeper than anything you could have done. I want to reconnect with her, but the pain from what both of you did is a wall I don't know how to breach. Kelly nodded, the understanding in her eyes reflecting the depth of my struggle. I get it, she said sadly, fully aware of the long road ahead for both of us. I really do. With a sigh, I responded, look, Kelly, I'm trying my best not to hate you. I'm getting professional help, but it's an uphill battle to resist the urge to yell and curse at you. As for Grace, I'll think about talking to her, but I can't make any promises. During that conversation, Kelly seemed to age right in front of me. The weight of her actions and words pressed heavily upon her, and as she stood up, she said, Bart, I know this means little now, but I truly am sorry for what I did. There are no excuses for my actions, and I understand I can never fully make amends. Her gaze locked onto mine, her face lined with the marks of regret. I'll serve my time and just hope that one day you might find it in yourself to forgive me. I may not be able to convince you of this, but I still love you. I lost sight of that for a while, but it has always remained. An awkward silence enveloped us as tears streamed down Kelly's face. She stepped toward the door and knocked, her prison escort arriving promptly to open it. Before she left, she glanced back at me, her voice filled with raw emotion. Love Myra, Bart. Give her the love I carelessly threw away. Live a beautiful life and... I'll never forget you, Kelly said, her voice steady as she walked out of the room. Watching her leave, I found myself reflecting on the conversation we had just shared. It was remarkable how there had been no shouting, no heated exchanges. Instead, Kelly had faced the situation with a surprising level of acceptance. She acknowledged her mistakes, taking full responsibility for her actions and the consequences that came with them, including her prison sentence. As I stepped out behind her, my gaze fell on the floor, where a trail of tears glistened, a poignant reminder of the emotional weight of our discussion. I paused for a moment, mourning the remnants of what once was between us before I turned and walked away, feeling a mix of sorrow and relief. As I made my way down the corridor, my spirits lifted when I caught sight of Myra waiting for me in the public gallery. Even on such a solemn day, she managed to look beautiful, embodying a sense of warmth and support that I desperately needed. "Did everything go well?" she asked, her voice soft yet filled with concern. I nodded, surprised by how the conversation unfolded. "Yes," I replied. It was surprising. I expected her to make excuses, but she took most of the blame, showing real remorse for what she had done. "What do you think about that?" Myra inquired, her brows furrowing slightly as she leaned in closer. I took a moment to gather my thoughts before responding. I still have a lot of anger toward Roger and her. But unlike Roger, I also feel a sense of pity for her. She understands now that she ruined everything, and she's paying for it. Grace has cut her off too, I added, feeling the weight of the situation press down on me. Myra nodded silently, then hesitated before speaking again. "John and Grace are here," she finally said. "John mentioned they'd be at the cafe across the street if you wanted to talk. Apparently, they had a big fight over how Grace treated you, but she's desperate to see you." I took a deep breath, contemplating the idea of facing Grace after everything that had transpired. "You think I should talk to her, don't you?" Myra nodded earnestly. "Yes, my love. There's a pain in your soul that only Grace can heal. But I'll be with you the whole time, and if I need to, I'll defend you like a mama bear." Her words warmed my heart, and I leaned in, kissing her gently. "I love you, Bart," she said, and as I pulled back, I felt compelled to express my feelings. "I love you too, Myra." It was my first public declaration of love for her, and I didn't care who saw. Myra was the only person who mattered in that moment. "Let's go," I said, intertwining our fingers as we walked hand in hand to the cafe. Upon entering, I noticed Grace and John seated at a table. Grace appeared torn, almost caught between the urge to run away or to embrace me. Opening my arms wide, she hesitated only for a moment before rushing into my embrace, clinging to me tightly as tears streamed down her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Daddy," she repeated, her voice muffled against me. I glanced at Myra, who smiled reassuringly, and then at John, who looked unsure of how to navigate the emotional landscape unfolding before him. After a few minutes, I gently pushed Grace away so we could all sit down. "I just talked to your mom," I said quietly, gauging her reaction. Grace nodded, her expression filled with a mix of regret and confusion. I heard, "Dad. I'm sorry. I held up my hand, interrupting her. "I know, Gracie. Your mom explained a lot, but your words hurt me deeply. I felt abandoned by someone I thought would always care about me. What hurt the most was that you didn't even ask if I was innocent." Grace's face flushed with embarrassment, and she squared her shoulders, determination replacing her earlier uncertainty. "Dad, She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "No, I need to say this. I should have given you a chance to explain, but I didn't. I can't blame Mom or Roger. They convinced me you were guilty, that you were going to jail, that you were having an affair." She glanced at Myra, who sat quietly, supporting me with her presence. "By the time you called, I was so worked up that I said things I regret," Grace admitted, her voice trembling. John chimed in, "That's what caused a lot of our fighting. When Myra left messages about you being in the hospital, I thought it was a trick. Mom and Roger made it sound like you were just seeking attention and that Myra was part of your scheme." Grace's eyes darted between Myra and me, her expression pleading for understanding. "They said you just wanted attention, but it's true, Dad. You were trying to." She couldn't finish her thought, and a heavy silence settled over us, the weight of unspoken truths hanging thick in the air. I nodded, taking a deep breath before revealing my scars, both physical and emotional. "I'm sorry, Gracie. I was at my lowest point and didn't see a way out. I got drunk and made a terrible mistake." My voice was slow and deliberate, each word a struggle, yet I knew it was essential to convey the magnitude of my pain and the impact of her earlier words. Grace began to sob, burying her face in her hands while Myra held me close, our emotions in danger of overwhelming us both. Myra's laughter filled the air, a sound so warm and genuine that it immediately began to dissolve the tension that had been hanging over us like a heavy cloud. The atmosphere shifted, and for the next few hours, we found ourselves engrossed in deep conversation, each sharing our experiences and perspectives. It was during this time that Grace, sensing the need for a more personal connection, decided to switch seats with Myra. As she moved closer, she wrapped her arms around me in a heartfelt hug, a gesture that spoke volumes about our desire to reconnect and heal. Although that meeting didn't miraculously resolve all our issues, it marked a significant starting point in mending the rifts that had formed between Grace and me. Months passed as we navigated the difficult journey of rebuilding our relationship. The process required patience, understanding, and effort from both sides. To facilitate this healing, we made the choice to attend counseling together. Through these sessions, we confronted our trust issues and the other challenges that had arisen between us. One particularly challenging therapy session stands out in my memory. It involved a difficult conversation where I expressed my feelings about Grace's desire to cut her mother entirely out of her life. Despite everything that had transpired, I believed it was crucial for Grace to realize that Kelly, for all her flaws, was still her mother. I urged Grace to consider that Kelly was facing the consequences of her actions and deserved a chance at redemption, albeit limited. After some contemplation, Grace agreed to visit Kelly, but only if I accompanied her on that first visit. When the day of our meeting arrived, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The visit was emotionally taxing, and afterward, we found ourselves mostly silent, processing what had just happened. However, I was proud of Grace for making the effort to reach out. A week later, Kelly surprised me by sending a letter addressed to me, expressing her gratitude for encouraging that visit. It was a small victory, a step toward healing for all involved. 6 months later, as the dust began to settle on our complicated lives, I chose to propose to Myra during a family dinner. The moment was filled with emotion and joy, with Tilly and Grace voicing their approval, declaring it long overdue. John, who had been a steady presence through all our trials, extended his hand to me, firmly shaking mine while reminding me to take care of Myra, echoing the very words I had once shared with him. Soon after, Grace and John tied the knot, and I had the privilege of blessing their union. Myra took the initiative to visit Kelly in jail, requesting permission to step in as the mother of the bride for Grace's wedding. Kelly, in a moment of unexpected vulnerability, agreed while in tears. Tilly proudly embraced her new role as the flower girl, affectionately calling herself my second daughter. In that moment, my identity shifted from Uncle Bart to Dad, a title I wore with pride as I walked Grace down the aisle. With each step, I felt the remnants of our previous strained relationship dissolve, replaced by a profound sense of connection and love. After the ceremony, Grace took the time to send photos and a heartfelt letter to Kelly, expressing her gratitude for allowing Myra to take her place. I learned later that Kelly kept those tokens of appreciation displayed on the wall of her cell, a reminder of the family bonds that could withstand even the toughest trials. As the complexities of the legal battles with Roger and Kelly drew to a close, Reagan, our adept negotiator, managed to secure a significant settlement for both Myra and me. While Clarence initially resisted, insisting on offering a deal that we deemed unsatisfactory, he eventually conceded just before trial, ultimately offering terms that allowed us to walk away with a high 6-figure sum for Myra and a 7-figure sum for me. While this settlement was far less than the potential fallout of a public trial, it forced Clarence's hand, compelling him to retire and sell his company for much less than it was worth at the time. With the settlement funds, Myra and I boldly embarked on establishing our own engineering consulting firm, focusing on providing both administrative and engineering services. Within just 6 months, we had grown our team to 5 employees, all engaged in substantial projects spread across the country. One of our first major clients was Peter Pembroke, who, recognizing the wrongs we had endured, took us out to dinner to extend his apologies. He candidly admitted that the project we worked on together would have likely failed without the contributions of my engineering expertise. From that moment on, we found ourselves included in all of Pembroke's major events, regardless of whether we were currently working on their projects, a testament to the respect and camaraderie fostered through our professional relationships. In light of our newfound success, we sold Myra's modest house and acquired a much larger residence, boasting breathtaking views of Kings Park. While the 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom home required extensive restoration, we dedicated the next 2 years to bringing it back to life, taking breaks only during family holidays, a wedding, and the joyous arrival of Grace and Tilly's little brother, Byron. Life improved considerably during this period, although I occasionally succumbed to unsettling dreams. Yet, through it all, Myra remained steadfastly by my side, providing comfort and reassurance. Fast forward a decade, and Byron had blossomed into a bright 10-year-old, and as he prepared to enter university to study law, following in the footsteps of Aunt Reagan, we found ourselves enjoying a leisurely Saturday afternoon. Grace and John were visiting, and we were all comfortably seated on our front terrace, the stunning view of Kings Park serving as the backdrop. Byron was engaged in an Xbox session with my 7-year-old grandson, Bruce, while my 5-year-old granddaughter, Hope, made enthusiastic attempts to join in on the fun. Next week, I have plans to meet with her, eager to gather more details about the matter we only touched on briefly during our last conversation. To prepare for this, I reached out to David, who has become a close friend of mine and serves as the head of the major crimes team. Our connection developed over time, especially as we both share similar interests and a commitment to community safety. "Hey Bart, how are you? How's Myra?" David greeted me with warmth, his friendly tone immediately putting me at ease. "Myra is great," I replied, but then the weight of recent events pressed on my mind, leading me to share my concerns. However, I just found out Roger was released. Upon hearing his name, David's demeanor shifted. I could sense the gravity of the situation. "I received the report yesterday," David responded, his tone now serious and focused. "I actually intended to bring it up when we meet for bowling next week. Roger is relocating to Adelaide for a new job. He mentioned to his probation officer that he wished you'd rot in hell for ruining his life." David's words hung heavy in the air, and I couldn't shake the unease they caused. Yet, he continued, "It's been a tough time for him overall, but I genuinely don't think he will pose a problem for you." I felt a sense of relief wash over me at his reassurance. "Thanks, David. That was my main concern. If I hear anything more, I'll be sure to let you know." We exchanged a few more casual remarks about our upcoming bowling night and a barbecue that we were planning, but my mind was still wrestling with the implications of Roger's release as I made my way back to the table. When I sat down, Myra glanced up at me and asked about the conversation I had just had with David. I nodded, giving a brief confirmation that Roger had indeed been released and was moving to Adelaide. "But he still hates me," I admitted with a hint of resignation. "The feelings are mutual," I added bitterly, recalling the animosity that had lingered between us. The air at the dinner table felt subdued after dropping that bombshell, but my family rallied around me, ensuring I felt their unwavering support. Later that night, I was jolted awake, screaming from a nightmare that threatened to pull me back into a darkness I had thought I had left behind. In the nightmare, Roger emerged, threatening my family in ways that made my heart race and sent shivers of anxiety coursing through me. He forced me to resort to the razor again, a terrifying reminder of past struggles. Myra woke instantly, her concern palpable, as she tried to calm me down. Without hesitating, she reached for her phone and called my therapist, who kindly agreed to talk to us at 2 a.m. I poured my heart out, explaining the contents of my dream while Myra listened beside me, her eyes glistening with tears. Talking about it helped me process the emotions, and my therapist suggested that my anxiety surrounding Roger's release likely triggered the nightmare. We arranged a follow-up session so I could further explore these feelings. After our call, Myra quietly checked on Byron, who was still peacefully asleep. I knew he would be awake soon, but for now, I let the moment of calm wash over me. Eventually, I returned to bed after hearing the gentle sounds of our conversation, and Myra snuggled close to me, seeking comfort in our connection. "Do you think Roger will be a problem?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. I took a deep breath before answering, "No, I think he'll just disappear, and we won't hear from him again. Besides, even if we do, we're prepared for whatever comes our way." I hinted at the hunting gear we had stored safely, a symbol of our readiness to protect ourselves. Myra nodded, her expression still filled with concern. "I'm sorry this news upset you. Are you okay?" I thought for a moment before responding, "Sort of. There will always be a shadow from those days, but I try to focus on the good in my life now." I paused, looking into her eyes, filled with gratitude. "I'm so grateful for you, the woman who saved my life." Myra looked at me seriously, and I could see the love reflected in her gaze. "I love you, Bart," she said softly, almost as if reaffirming the bond we shared through all the turmoil. "I love you too, Myra," I replied, my heart swelling with appreciation for the life we were building together. We both drifted back to sleep, reassured by the knowledge that while life was not perfect, we had more good days than bad. Challenges still lay ahead, as did fights and nightmares. Yet, I felt fortified by the unconditional love of a woman who made everything possible, friends who embraced my journey, and a family that stood resolutely by my side through the storms of life.